Well, good Tuesday morning to everyone out there, and it is August 11th. Today we want to make sure that we're praying for all the folks that suffered loss yesterday from all of the crazy wind that came through the pretty much a large section of the Midwest. We were very fortunate here, as Clint and I were just talking, right here in Lake City per se. We didn't have the winds like some of the folks just not too terribly far from here had, and I know that it was even very, very windy over all the way to Omaha and up, I believe, up into the Dakotas. And I'm not exactly sure how far and widespread the wind was, but it was quite widespread, and has caused considerable amount of damage, a lot of crop loss, and a lot of buildings damaged. And so we'll be working on trying to discern what we need to do about that as we go through the next few days. But today and this morning, we are going to continue our journey through Galatians. We're in the fourth chapter. We're going to wrap up the fourth chapter today. Taking a big bite today, unlike what we've normally done, trying to take little nibbles. But this story, we don't. There's no good breaking point in this. We've just got to take the whole thing. So we're looking at verses 21 to 31 today. That's a bigger bite than I normally take. But it's Paul's allegory, his recasting and reinterpreting the story of Hagar and Sarah, of Ishmael and Isaac, and it's interesting. And this is was a common practice for the rabbis to use allegory in their teaching. And so it's something that I've talked about the Mishnah before, and it's something that you see some of these things that get into the Mishnah, and it's some of the things that have been carried on into the modern tradition. I guess would more call it the narrative way of preaching, and that's something, I'll be honest, it bothers me a little bit, because many times I will hear these preachers that want to create this narrative, and they take a story and they create an elaborate story out of this, and they add a bunch of details into the story that just aren't there in the scripture. And you can really easily, by doing that, take a biblical story and flip it on its head, and take in it and as trying to use it as proof text for something that's completely the opposite of what the scripture is actually portraying. And I've seen that done, and I don't like it when you throw too many details in there, and especially when you use those details that you fabricated as your proof text. And I've seen that done, and like I said, it's easy enough to twist scripture, but when you rewrite it, it's really easy to twist it. And that's just Roy's rant for the day. But I don't particularly care for that style. It's a very entertaining way of preaching, and if it's done right, it can be done well. I see too often, though, that it's again, I feel like it's misused, and so I tend to stay away from it just because I've seen it misused. But that's just me being judgmental, I guess. I apologize. Anyway, again, that's just Roy's rant. But today, Paul does something similar. He takes up this story of Hagar and Sarah, of Isaac and Ishmael, and he recasts it, so to say. And if Paul wasn't already getting himself in Dutch with the Jewish Christians, and more so, perhaps much more so, getting himself in trouble with the teachers in the temple and the synagogues and what have you. If they saw a copy of this letter and they saw this story and the way that he's interpreting this story, I think they'd probably be pretty upset with him. In fact, I'm positive they'd be upset with him. Sometimes, though, preaching and teaching does have to strike a nerve in us sometimes in order to make us move. I think it's an effective story. I think it's an effective telling. But he really does take this story and twists it. I think the first time, if you're like me, the first few times you read it, you kind of go, Paul, what in the world are you talking about? And what are you doing here? But there's a reason for what he's doing here. We just have to stop and think about it. And we just have to stop and realize what he's doing here. So it is, this, like I said, this is a bigger bite of scripture. So let's just jump into it. and see what we can figure out about what Paul's doing here, as crazy as he might be. All right, 21 to 31 in the 4th chapter of Galatians. Tell me, you who desire to be under law, do you not hear the law? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by a slave and one by a free woman. But the son of the slave was born according to the flesh, the son of the free woman through promise. Now this is an allegory. These women are 2 covenants. One is from Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. She is Hagar. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. She corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, and she is our mother. For it is written, Rejoice, O barren one who does not bear. Break forth and shout, you who are not in travail. For the children of the desolate one are many more than the children of her that is married. Now we, brethren, like Isaac, are children of promise. But as at that time he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, so it is now. But what does the Scripture say? Cast out the slave and her son, for the son of the slave shall not inherit with the son of the free woman. So, brethren, we are not children of the slave, but of the free woman. Okay, he's recast Israel as Hagar and Ishmael, and Jerusalem, or Sarah and Isaac as, what do we want to say, the Christian movement that is going away from this being, believing that the law, that you can be saved by the law. And what he's done here is he's got, we've been talking about Abraham and the promise and all this. This is his final, just in case you missed it, here we're talking about the law and the promise, okay? The slave, enslaved underneath the law, okay? That's Hagar, and so this is what he's talking about there, and he's contrasting that with the free woman. And the point of that is that we remember that Abraham and Sarah are promised a child from their own union, okay? And considerable time passes after the promise, and they're, oh my gosh, what's going on? And Sarah finally says, I'll bring you my slave girl Hagar, and you lay with her, and we'll have a child, and it'll be my child through my maidservant. And Abraham acquiesces to this idea, showing a lack of faith on both their parts, that God could and would do what he had promised, as he had promised Abraham about that all nations would be saved through his prodigy. So he's equating these 2 promises. All right, that's what's going on here. And of course, Ishmael with Hagar. This is a child brought about by the work of the flesh. This is by us trying to force the matter, trying to, God's not quite doing it. Remember the story of Moses and, bringing forth the water, and he got in trouble, didn't he? Because he was supposed to say, bring forth the water. Instead, he tapped the stone twice, I believe, if I remember my story correctly. And he didn't get to go to the promised land because with a lack of faith. He had to put extra effort into it, that fleshliness. And that's what's going on here. You've got the promise, you've got Isaac, that it was this prodigy that was promised him by their own union. And then you've got Ishmael, where they couldn't wait. And so they rushed ahead and tried to do things there for themselves rather than relying on God to take care of it. And that's the faith and the works, okay? The law and Christ. This is what we've got going on here. So he's using this as an example. He's using this to mirror this situation. But it is a peculiar allegory because Sarah and Isaac, that's where the nation of Israel comes. Isaac, and you have Jacob becomes Israel, and his sons, and all of that. So we know that like Paul, what are you talking about? You got this story twisted around. But he's using it to illustrate a point. And his illustration is effective. And even though he's twisted the story, he's doing it, and like I said, somewhat perhaps to get their attention, to make them really think about it. And so it's an effective allegory. I will caution you on doing this kind of a thing to make sure that you're not trying to twist and set Scripture on its head and use it to advance your own narrative. Okay. That's one of the problems I have with narrative preaching. Is many times it tends to be, to me, it feels like you're advocating your own narrative and not the desires of God. And that, in fact, you are being, Paul's preaching against that, in my opinion. Here, you're trying to force things. You're trying to do it your own self rather than doing what God's wanting. So it's all about faith. This is his final point. Is it's about the promise. It's about faith. And that is the point. So let's not get ourselves wrapped up in the fact that he's twisted this on its head, though I would be remiss not to point that out, because somebody would be going, but wait, Pastor, he's got this all backwards. No, that's true, he does. But he did it to prove a point. And the point is valid. It's not an invalid point. So that would be the way you judge, allegorical preaching, is it violating what really is there, even if the story's been twisted, as Paul did here. So again, I think that's all I can really tell you about this bit of Scripture. He is using, again, Isaac and Sarah to represent the promise. God promised Sarah and Abraham that Isaac would be there, and they just didn't wait. Now we could, and my brain flashes up, we've got to be careful with all of our talk about the end times and such coming up. We're looking around, we go, oh, the world's getting really weird, and we got the COVID and all of that craziness, rioting and etc. And we can start are we trying to force the narrative of the end times coming, the coming again of Christ? We need to be more like, the promise of Isaac. We need to be it'll come when it comes. In God's time, it'll happen. When it happens, we'll know it. I'm pretty sure that when Sarah was given birth, she knew the promise was there. All right. So with that, I'm going to let you go today. Have a very blessed day. And of course, as always, make sure you are a blessing to someone today. And if you're here locally and somebody had some damage from the wind and needs some help, give us a holler up here at Clint and I, and we'll see what we can do. Okay? Have a very blessed one. We'll see you in the morning. And we'll start chapter 5 in the morning.